tongs, very important when you're sous viding, because one hand is on the blowtorch, the other hand is free, and it may be tempted to move things. If you have a pair of tongs in your hands, when you put your hand there to move something instinctively, it is this in the way of the flames and not your fingers. That's enough of that. It can be quite noisy. I gave up trying to record at the same time. But today we're doing a lovely piece of brisket. Quite a small piece, I know, but it is a lovely piece of brisket that I got from a supermarket. Yes, I know, but a very good supermarket. And a lovely piece of topside, which is from the Rug estate. Makes very nice meat. It was quite veal-y in appearance, very light. But we are looking for this kind of appearance. And the main reason for doing this is not only to impart flavour, which it does, but the other reason for doing this is to kill any pathogens on the surface. Now, for tough pieces of meat like brisket and topside, which we are probably going to be doing for a long amount of time, it doesn't really necessarily matter because the temperature is going to be at around 60 degrees is my preference, and therefore they are going to be pasteurised. The problem comes, the potential problem comes, but you don't read much about it, is that if you do extended periods of time with sous vide at below the 54 degrees centigrade, and obviously if your circulator, etc., don't put the top on, doesn't work very well. But mine I have measured, and despite it being a cheap Amazon special, it's at the the 55 to 60, 65 temperature range. It works perfectly. So what we're looking for is nice browned meat, which will give flavour, but also kill any surface pathogens. So we should be quite safe to sous vide without any worries whatsoever. It's always good. I'm going to do this one a little bit more. Obviously, as you can see, topside needs a little bit more searing than fatty meats like the brisket, which burns instantly. It's one thing to remember if you're in the skillet as well. Don't put any butter. I mean, if you do need butter, I know chefs love putting butter. I was in a very nice restaurant the other day, and someone was complaining that everything stank of butter. And I know in the US, I always ask for things without butter, because otherwise, I mean, I once saw a fillet have the same amount of butter as there was fillet. There was literally a 300 gram fillet that had a whole 250 gram slab of butter on it. It's not necessary, but just do remember, if you're trying to be healthy, that brisket has its own fat and really doesn't need anything to brown. Pieces like topside don't necessarily have that much surface fat, and so they need a bit more work to brown, I think is the only thing. That's not a bad thing, just one thing to bear in mind, especially if you're in a hurry. So I'm going to get back to finishing my topside. I don't know if it's just me, but that did sound a little bit wrong. But yeah, I'm going to get the blowtorch to my topside, and then we'll move on to the next phase. Beautifully bagged with these cuts that go in longer. I always manage to start filming when the sous vide beeps. It must be an omen. But anyway, with these longer cuts, a lot of people say to double bag and keep them in there a lot to basically make sure water doesn't get in. Two things: I don't like double bagging. it sounds wrong, but also it creates a bit of a thermal barrier, which I think is a bit unnecessary. But finally, it's a waste of plastic. And what is worth noting though is that obviously this seal at the bottom, which I do first when you buy a roll, is a lot cleaner than the seal at the top, which invariably is imperfect because some of those juices have come up and in between those two seals. So I usually leave the top seal out and the bottom seal in for two reasons. One of them, the bottom seal is less likely to break. But secondly, if the top seal is out, you can quite easily see if it's broken because air will have got in and they won't be sealed together. Don't have to sort of sit there guarding your meat for 24 hours, but it's worth having the odd look. There is something very satisfying about seeing 24 hours on a clock. It's like when you're going to get a long haul flight or something and settling in, ready for your for the long haul. So we now have our sous vide settled in. I've got a bowl there with water from inside on top to keep the meat down, and we can check the status of our vacuum by seeing that the outer seal, where all the juices came up before sealing and is possibly the weakest seal, is at the top. And you've just got to keep looking at this to make sure that these two layers are firmly together. And all these juices are up here because they will fall down if the vacuum goes. But yeah, I mean, mainly these two are together. And here we go, we're now at 23:58. We'll come back when it's at 23:57. No, I'm only joking. That joke does not get old for me. Important word there is for me, I suppose. So this is what the veal topside looks like. It's a pretty nice cut. I say veal so you can see from the colour that this was veal rather than a piece of beef. But it's, and this is all that's left. 2/3 of it have already disappeared, and I should have shown you. But one of the things you'll learn from cutting beef like this is that sometimes you just get it out and cut it up for an emergency, for feeding hungry mouths. The finish from the blowtorch still looks pretty good. Very different from how it looks if you just put it in the sous vide first and then have to obviously sear it. And the other thing that I did leave this for a few days in its sort of sealed bag. I'm not sure if that's a good or a bad thing. Please feel free to comment. I know the sauce or the liquid or the juice that comes out you're not supposed to use because it apparently doesn't taste very good, but I have used it on a few occasions and people have remarked that it was okay. But yeah, I mean, I think in future I'm just going to take them straight out and put them in another receptacle. So let's get this sliced up. So there you can see a perfectly pink roast veal, which you do sometimes get these kind of blood spots, which you can see a bit there. Generally, if it's a better hung piece of meat, you don't have it. I'm surprised with this being from the rug estates that it has those. But either way, when you warm it up, they will disappear. And if not, you can just mop them up with a tiny amount of kitchen oil or anything else you want to use. But if you look at that, I mean, that is a beautiful piece of beef, and we're going to cut this up now. I'm going to have it for my Sunday dinner. And yeah, it's just great to have in the fridge and have around ready to use. It cuts like fillet. It obviously costs like topside, and sous vide is a pretty convenient way of cooking it when you want to, and keeping it for longer. And I think, you know, just a much safer way of cooking, which is more child friendly. And this is now, you know, 2 weeks old, this piece of meat, so you can actually preserve it quite well with the sous vide. So here we have the final product, which is the brisket. Again, very good looking piece of meat. I did this earlier in the week. Bought it previous weekend. I've just taken it out of the bag after a good few days. All smells perfectly great. And I'm about to cut this open now. Obviously you could shred it, as people do with brisket quite often. But I'm just gonna slice it open so you can see what it's like. This was 24 hours at 60 degrees. So there you can see, 24 hours at 60 degrees. I just cut that again as if it were filet. Beautifully tender piece of meat, looks very good. You could serve that very well in any salad. Or, as I'm going to do now, is just warm it up and have it by itself. It's a fantastic piece of meat. Very cheap. You can do it in the sous vide at your convenience. I mean, what's not to like, really? Speak to you soon.